is that quiet old clerk really the one they're blaming again? The diner's neon buzzed softly as a spoon tapped a chipped cup, carrying the rumor across the room. Folks scoffed and pressed their judgment toward him, small voices landing heavier than they knew. But when a silver coin slipped from his pocket, ringing once against the counter in a hush cracked by a door creak, the light seemed to shift around him. Still quiet men leave echoes too. Let me take you back. The post office on Maple Street always felt a little too bright in the mornings, fluorescent tubes humming overhead, metal boxes catching every shard of light. Harold Boone stood behind the counter, shoulders slightly hunched, the way men do when they've spent years trying not to take up space. His navy cardigan was buttoned wrong at the top again, but no one mentioned it. Folks here rarely mentioned anything to Harold unless something had gone wrong. Frank Dillard slapped a tracking slip on the counter. "Package is late again, Harold. Third time this year. You got an explanation, or do I gotta guess?" Harold blinked slowly. "Let me check the system for you, sir." Behind Frank, 2 people shifted in line, then 3. A whisper rolled down the row like a draft sneaking under a door. "Here we go again? It's always him. Keeps messing up and nobody does anything." Harold typed carefully, each keystroke deliberate. Frank exhaled loud enough for the posters on the wall to hear. "Man, you're slower than Christmas. It's just a package lookup." Harold didn't argue. He rarely did. The room was full of the tiny sounds of impatience, tapping shoes, rustling jackets, a throat clearing with too much meaning. A soft clink came from Harold's pocket as he reached for his reading glasses. When he pulled out his wallet, a thin silver edge flashed just a glimmer before it disappeared again. Ellie, third in line, noticed. She wasn't sure why it caught her attention, but it did. Not many things shone in a building like this. Frank leaned in. "You losing packages or what? Or is this some new clerk hobby of yours? I'm following procedures, sir," Harold said, voice even. But inside he felt slammed by protocol forms. Checks, screens, steps you couldn't skip even when people wanted you to. "It'll just take a moment." "Been taking moments for years," someone muttered. A mail bin slid across the floor in the back, the squeak echoing off the metal walls. Harold glanced toward the noise, then back to the screen. "Your package arrived late at the regional center," he said softly. "It should be here by tomorrow at noon." Frank threw up a hand. Unbelievable. "Tomorrow. Always tomorrow with you." Harold nodded once, a quiet apology, without words. Frank stormed toward the door, brushing past the woman behind him without a glance. The chime rang sharply as the door opened, letting in a burst of November air. For a moment, Harold stood completely still. The fluorescent lights buzzed again, a little flicker in the left fixture. Then he stepped outside onto the small concrete landing. The cold hit him right away, clean, unfiltered honest. He let it sit against his face, breathing slow. Behind him, the line shuffled forward, filling the space Frank had left. Ellie watched through the glass, noticing the way Harold's breath fogged slightly as he steadied himself. Customers murmured again inside, but something in the room didn't sit right. Harold exhaled, straightened his cardigan, and walked back in as the door chime rang once more. The diner sat at the corner of Main and Birch, its windows fogged from the breakfast rush. Someone had taped a small notice beside the register, "Investigation pending, delayed parcels." Folks read it the way people read bad weather forecasts, expecting the worst, blaming the closest cloud. At a table near the window, 2 men spoke with no effort to lower their voices. "That old clerk again, huh? Probably misplaced half the county's mail." "Wouldn't surprise me." Their spoons clinked against ceramic cups, casual as a verdict. A couple at the next booth nodded along, without looking up agreement, rolling through the room like an unspoken conviction. Harold Boone sat by himself at the far end, hands wrapped around a warm mug. He'd only come in to rest before the afternoon shift, but the air felt heavier than the steam rising from his coffee. Every time someone glanced over the room pinned him with quiet expectation, waiting for him to break or admit something he hadn't done. Ellie slipped through the front door, brushing off the cold wind. She spotted him right away. "Mind if I sit?" He looked up, gentle as ever. "Of course." She settled across from him, sliding into the red vinyl booth. A server walked by with a pot, giving Harold's cup a refill without asking. The hiss from the spout filled the silence for a moment. "I saw what happened yesterday," Ellie said. "At the post office." Harold nodded once. "Just a delay in the system. People think they think you messed up." She hesitated before adding, "Again." He didn't flinch, but the lines around his eyes softened with something tired. "Folks worry about their mail." "I understand." Ellie tapped her finger on the table. "Yesterday when you were helping Frank, I saw something in your wallet. A silver coin." Harold blinked quiet for a beat. "Just something I carry." He took a slow sip, the kind meant to end a conversation gently. But Ellie leaned in slightly. It looked important. A busboy passed their booth, pushing a bin of dishes toward the kitchen. The scent of coffee and maple syrup lingered as he went, leaving the window view clear for a moment. A dry leaf skittered across the sidewalk outside, flicked by the November wind. "You ever think people judge too fast?" Ellie asked. Harold smiled faintly. "People fill in blanks with what they know. Or think they know. Still," she said, "doesn't make it right." The bell over the diner door jingled as more customers walked in. One pointed at the investigation pending sign and whispered to another, eyes drifting toward Harold before looking away quickly. He folded his hands around his mug again. "It'll work out. Mail has a way of finding where it's meant to go." Ellie studied him, his steadiness, the way he didn't push back, the way he accepted the room without letting it reshape him. It made her wonder what kind of man carries a coin like that and never mentions it. Harold glanced toward the fogged window, watching the leaf disappear down the street. Still, the parcel's path wouldn't leave his mind. He straightened slightly as a server passed by again. "Thank you," he said softly. The woman gave him a kind smile, the first he'd seen all morning. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the door as the bell chimed once more. A thin layer of snow had settled along the post office steps by late afternoon, the kind that made everything look softer than it felt. Harold Boone worked quietly outside, brushing off the railing first, then shoveling a neat path toward the sidewalk. He moved with a patient rhythm, like someone who'd spent a lifetime tending to small things no one else bothered to notice. Ellie approached from across the street, slowing when she saw him replace the dim porch bulb above the entrance. The warm glow flicked on, chasing away the early dusk that had crept in too fast. She watched him adjust the fixture twice, making sure it sat just right before stepping back. "Need a hand?" she called. He turned surprised. "Oh, no, thank you. Just keeping the place safe for tomorrow." "You do this every night?" she asked. "Only when it needs doing." Inside, the last customer of the day dropped a package in the slot, the metallic echo carrying through the glass door. Harold bent to gather the scattered bits of salt someone had spilled earlier and swept them into a small dustpan. Ellie hesitated before speaking again. "I keep thinking about that coin you carry. The silver one." Harold paused. "Most folks don't notice it. I saw it again. When you reach for the light switch." She stepped closer, lowering her voice. "There's an emblem on it, isn't there? Some kind of engraving." He didn't answer right away. Instead, he brushed snow from the last step, stood, and unbuttoned his cardigan just enough to slip a hand into the inner pocket. The coin appeared only briefly, a faint gleam of metal catching the new porch light. Ellie saw the shape this time, a carved crest she didn't recognize before he tucked it away again. "It's something I keep with me," he said, simply. "Looks important. It is, in its own way." The wind shifted, carrying the soft sound of voices from the church hall down the block. A choir was rehearsing low harmonies, rising and falling like warm breath in the cold air. The melody floated through the street, wrapping around the buildings, settling over the steps where they stood. Ellie folded her arms. "You know, people don't usually do all this after hours. Fixing things, clearing snow. It's easier when no one's around," Harold said. "Less pressure. More time to get it right." She watched him straighten the welcome mat, his movements careful and steady. Something about the way he treated this place, this little post office, felt almost ceremonial, like every task mattered more than it seemed. When he finished, he stepped to the edge of the walkway, looking out at the quiet street. The lamplight stretched across the road, turning the thin layer of snow into a sheet of gold. Ellie stood beside him. "You care about this town more than people realize." He didn't respond immediately. His breath curled in the cold air, dissolving into the choir's distant harmony. "You ever think," he said softly, "that sometimes a small mistake points to a bigger problem? Something outside your hands?" She looked at him puzzled. "About the missing parcel?" He nodded once. "I checked the logs again. Something's off." "Off how?" He didn't answer. Not yet. His gaze remained fixed on the quiet street, as though he were waiting for it to tell him something he'd forgotten. Then again, one detail still bothered him. A gust of wind swept across the steps, carrying the choir's final note into the settling dusk, as Harold reached for the door and switched off the outside light. The post office was closed for the night, but Harold Boone returned anyway, key turning softly in the lock. The hallway lights flickered on with a tired hum. Snowmelt had dried in thin streaks along the floor where customers had walked earlier, and the building felt hollow without their voices. He walked toward the sorting room, the weight of the day pressing against his ribs. Something in the logs hadn't fit one number wrong, one scan out of place. He moved through the stacks with slow, practiced steps, lifting bins, checking the older slots built decades before he ever worked here. A draft slipped under the door as he crouched beside the rusted sorting table. When he pushed against the backboard, a thin cardboard corner peeked through a gap where the wood had warped. He reached in carefully and drew out Frank Dillard's missing package, wedged so tightly it must have fallen during last month's maintenance. The label was still intact, though dusty along the edges. Harold exhaled part relief, part dread. Finding it wouldn't stop the town from believing what it wanted to believe. He stood, but the movement nudged his cardigan pocket. A silver coin slipped free, striking the linoleum with a clear, ringing clink. The sound cut through the empty room, startling even him. He bent to pick it up, the carved crest glinting under the fluorescent light. An emblem shaped by years and saltwater memory. Footsteps echoed in the lobby. Harold turned as Frank marched in, shoulders stiff, jaw set. "I knew it," Frank snapped. "You hiding evidence now? Trying to cover your screw-ups?" Harold held the package against his chest. It was stuck behind the table. "I just found it." "That's convenient." Frank stepped closer, voice rising. "People in this town trust the mail. They trust you. And you keep letting them down." Harold tried to explain, but Frank talked over him, the frustration building like a storm behind his eyes. "You've messed up before, and now?" He broke off as others began filtering in from the hallway. Ellie, Mrs. Crane from the counter, two customers who'd followed Frank inside after seeing him cross the street. Their murmurs filled the room with a familiar ache of doubt. Frank jabbed a finger toward Harold. "This time, you're not dodging it. Say something, Harold. Or are you just going to stand there?" The air tightened. Even Frank looked caught in it, pinned by the sudden truth waiting to break open. Protocol slammed harder than any shove, everyone watching, everyone ready to judge. Harold opened his mouth, but the front door burst wide with a sharp crack of cold air. A tall figure stepped inside, silhouette framed by the street lamp behind him. His uniform coat carried the deep navy blue of someone who had worn the sea for half a lifetime. Snow clung to his shoulders in soft patches. "Harold Boone," the man asked, voice firm enough to still the room. Every whisper died. Even Frank's unfinished accusation hung in the air like a thread cut mid-stitch. Harold blinked. "Yes, sir." The man stepped forward, removing his cap with a quiet, deliberate motion. "Town records said you worked here. I hope they were right." People edged aside as he approached. Ellie's hand hovered near her mouth. The commander's gaze swept across the room. "Before anyone says another word, I want every person here to listen." Frank swallowed hard, backing a step. The commander's voice dropped into a steady tone, low, clear, carrying weight the way a lighthouse carries light. "His name is Harold Boone," he said. "And in the storm of '89, when our cutter nearly capsized, he kept 6 sailors alive for 17 hours until rescue arrived." The room went still. 6, he repeated, because he refused to quit his post, because he held the line when the rest of us were slipping. Harold stood frozen, the package still in his hands. The commander looked straight at Frank. "So before you speak his name again, remember what it cost him to carry it this far." No one breathed. Even the furnace seemed to quiet. The commander faced Harold once more. "I came to return something." He nodded toward the coin in Harold's hand. "I gave that to you years ago. Never thought I'd find you behind a counter in a quiet town." Harold's eyes lifted, shining in the thin light. The commander stepped back, giving the room to him. For the first time in years, Harold Boone seemed to stand a little taller, as though the walls around him finally understood who they'd been holding all this time. And the town realized it had never known him at all. The next evening, the town hall filled slowly, coats shaking off snow chairs scraping across the floor. Neighbors settling in with the kind of murmurs that came before a reckoning. At the front, a maintenance report lay clipped to a board, the pages stamped and initialed. Someone had finally inspected the old sorting table at the post office. The verdict was simple: structural warping caused the parcel drop. Harold Boone had done nothing wrong. Harold stood off to the side, hands folded loosely, his expression calm but guarded. Ellie stayed near him, ready if he needed her. Frank arrived, last hat in hand, moving with a careful humility, very different from the fire he'd carried the night before. When the mayor stepped up and cleared his throat, the room went quiet. "We've confirmed the issue," he said. "The fault was with the table, not the clerk." He nodded toward Harold with a gentle sincerity. "Thank you for staying late and helping us find the truth." Frank took a breath, then walked to Harold. The crowd shifted, watching. "Harold," he said quietly, "I owe you an apology." His voice lacked its usual edge. "I shouldn't have jumped on you like that. I didn't know anything." Harold shook his head. "You were worried about your package." Still, Frank added, "I should have trusted you more." It wasn't a grand apology, but it was clean, honest, something Harold had learned to appreciate more than speeches. Ellie stepped forward. "Can I say something?" She looked around, cheeks pink from the cold. Yesterday I saw Harold clearing the steps after hours, fixing the bulb, sweeping the walk. He does that a lot, and he never tells anyone. A soft ripple went through the crowd. She continued, "Folks talk about mistakes, but they don't talk about how he keeps this whole place running. Quietly. Every day. Half the town doesn't notice." She paused, smiling. "Chu Boone, you're going to end up repairing the whole town at this rate." A few people chuckled, the first warmth the room had shared all night. Someone near the front lifted the maintenance report. "We'll replace the table before the week's out," he said. "No more lost parcels dropping through gaps." As the meeting eased into softer conversation, Ellie glanced at Harold's hand. The silver coin was tucked safely in his pocket again, but she could see the faint outline under the knit fabric. She nudged him gently. "You should tell them what that coin means," she whispered. "Maybe someday," he replied. "Tonight's enough." He drifted toward the wooden board, listing the town trustees and past leaders, fingertips brushing the smooth frame as if grounding himself. The chatter behind him softened into a kind hum, understanding apology, a second chance settling across the room. Snow tapped lightly against the tall windows. The choir from the church hall down the street had begun another rehearsal, their voices faint but steady, weaving through the cold air like a benediction. Harold breathed in slowly, letting the warmth of the moment settle. Justice didn't always come with fanfare. Sometimes it arrived in a plain room with folding chairs and neighbors trying their best. He closed his eyes for a moment, the coin resting against his heart, and listened as the voices outside rose in gentle harmony. The town gathered again the following week, this time in the warm glow of the library foyer. Snow drifted lazily outside the tall windows, catching in the lamplight like slow-falling sparks. A wooden plaque hung beneath a canvas cloth at the center of the room, the grain polished to a soft shine. Harold Boone stood near the back, trying to make himself smaller than he already was. Ellie pressed a warm cup of cocoa into his hands. "You earned this," she said gently. "I just did my job," he murmured. "Sometimes that's the hardest kind of hero," she replied. A hush fell as the door opened. The Navy commander stepped inside, brushing off snow with the same measured dignity he'd carried the night he arrived. He walked straight toward Harold, nodding once in greeting, before turning to the gathered neighbors. "I asked the town council for a moment," he began, "because this place ought to remember the people who hold its corners together." Whispers settled. Someone dimmed the foyer lights, leaving the plaque bathed in a single amber spotlight. When trouble came, some folks doubted him. The commander continued, his voice deliberate and steady. They doubted his patience, his work, even his worth. He paused, letting the truth sit gently in the room, until his real name, stood up for itself. Ellie glanced at Harold, catching the way he shifted, not used to being seen so clearly. The commander stepped toward the plaque and loosened the cloth. It fell away with a soft whisper of fabric, revealing carved lettering and a small embedded metal disc. The silver coin gleamed from its place at the top corner, set into the wood, so its crest caught the light. A murmur rippled through the room as people recognized it, the same coin they'd glimpsed, wondered about, whispered over. Harold exhaled, stunned. "You didn't have to do that," he said quietly. The commander shook his head. "I did. Legacy isn't about medals and boxes. It's about truth carried forward. And your truth lives here now, whether you ask for it or not." Harold stepped closer to the plaque. His fingers brushed the carved edge of his name. Harold Boone burnished into the wood with a tenderness that surprised him. The gold light warmed the grain, spreading across the coin like a sunrise. Ellie stood beside him. They'll know now, she said softly. All of it? He nodded, humbled. Maybe that'll be enough. Outside, the choir's rehearsal drifted through the cold, their harmonies rising through the winter air. People lingered around the plaque, touching the wood, reading the inscription, repeating his name with new respect. A neighbor said quietly, "Hard to believe we doubted him." Another answered, "Not anymore." Harold lifted his cocoa, letting the steam warm his face. He didn't need speeches or applause. It was enough to stand in a room that had finally stopped looking past him. The commander clasped his shoulder, once a gesture of recognition, not ceremony. Then he stepped back, letting Harold receive the room on his own terms. The plaque glowed under the amber light coin, shining like a quiet promise that the past would no longer be hidden. If this story moved you, share it forward. Harold stood in the foyer as the plaque's golden light warmed the room, and neighbors lingered around him with the soft hum of the choir drifting in from down the street. Still, he held the moment, gently running a thumb along the coin etched into the wood, as if confirming that quiet service could leave a mark after all. The commander nodded from the doorway, reminding him